The night was supposed to be just another routine patrol for the two officers. The streets were quiet, the air thick with the usual city buzz. But then they saw her, standing alone under a streetlight, wearing a sleek black skirt and a confident smirk. She didn't look nervous, didn't try to avoid them. That made her interesting. One officer nudged the other, exchanging a knowing glance. They approached, their usual arrogance on display. "Out a little late, aren't you?" one of them said, circling her. She didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head, studying them like they were the ones being observed. They didn't realize that their so-called routine was about to take a sharp turn, because this woman, this seemingly ordinary woman, wasn't just anyone. She was a CIA agent on an undercover mission, and in just a few seconds, they were going to regret underestimating her. The taller officer stepped closer, his hand resting on his belt. "What's in the bag?" he asked, nodding toward the sleek purse hanging off her shoulder. His partner chuckled under his breath, watching her reaction. But she didn't move, didn't even blink. Instead, she let a small smile creep onto her lips, as if she knew something they didn't. "Just some essentials," she said smoothly, her voice calm. Her confidence threw them off for a second, but they weren't about to back down. The shorter officer reached out, fingers grazing the hem of her skirt as if testing boundaries. "Nice outfit for a walk this late," he remarked. Her eyes flicked to his hand, just for a second. It was quick, but enough to make the taller officer shift uneasily. Something about her felt off. They thought they were in control. They had no idea she was just getting started. The woman's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse, but not out of fear. She was calculating, reading the situation like a chessboard where she was 3 moves ahead. She had dealt with men like this before, too confident, too sure of their own authority. The shorter officer's smirk faded slightly as he noticed something unusual. Her stance wasn't defensive. It was controlled, measured, like she was waiting. "You got ID on you?" the taller one asked, voice gruffer now. She reached into her purse, her movements slow and deliberate. The officers tensed, expecting something routine, a driver's license, maybe a student ID. Instead, she pulled out a small black card, barely visible under the streetlight. She held it up just long enough for them to catch the silver letters. Their faces changed instantly. The smirks disappeared. The easy confidence drained from their posture. She saw it, the flicker of realization, the brief moment of panic. "You might want to rethink your next move," she said, her voice steady. The officers exchanged a look, the weight of their mistake settling in. But it was too late. The game had already begun. The taller officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His partner took a slow step back, but there was nowhere to go. The street suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. The woman tilted her head slightly, watching them with an expression that was almost amused. "I asked if you had ID," the taller officer muttered, trying to regain control of the moment. "You did," she said, still holding up the card. "And now you know who I am." The shorter officer's hand twitched toward his radio, but she noticed. Before he could press the button, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them in a way that made them both freeze. "Here's the thing," she continued, lowering her voice just enough to make them lean in. "You've already made a mistake. The question is, how many more do you want to make?" A car rolled by in the distance, headlights sweeping across the scene, but no one moved. The officers were trapped between instinct and uncertainty. They had authority, but she had something stronger, knowledge. They didn't know how deep they were in, not yet, but they were about to find out. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken tension. The taller officer squared his shoulders, trying to shake off the unease crawling up his spine. "Look, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but—" She cut him off with a slow, knowing smile. "But what?" Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "You sure you want to finish that sentence?" The shorter officer shifted his weight, his hand still hovering near his radio. That's when she saw it, the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He wasn't just nervous, he was scared. Then, something changed. A faint crackle came through his earpiece. A voice on the other end, static, a few jumbled words, and then, "Stand down." Both officers stiffened. The command hadn't come from their station, it had come from somewhere else, somewhere higher. She watched their faces, saw the realization hit like a wave. They weren't the ones in control anymore. "Good," she said softly, slipping the card back into her purse. "Now you're starting to understand." But before they could process it, before they could react, a black SUV turned the corner, rolling to a slow, deliberate stop. The real players had arrived, and the night was far from over. The black SUV idled for a moment, its tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. The two officers stood frozen, glancing at each other, uncertainty tightening their features. They had started the night thinking they were in control, but now they weren't even sure who was pulling the strings. The woman stayed perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Then the back door of the SUV swung open, and a man in a crisp suit stepped out. No badge, no uniform, just an air of quiet authority that made the officers tense up even more. "Gentlemen," the man said, his voice smooth but firm, "we'll take it from here." The taller officer opened his mouth to protest, but one glance at the man's cold, unreadable stare made him think twice. He exhaled sharply, then muttered, "We didn't know." The woman finally spoke, her voice carrying just a hint of amusement. "That much is clear." She turned toward the SUV, stepping in without another word. The suited man followed, shutting the door behind them. The vehicle pulled away, leaving the officers standing in the dim glow of the streetlight, their hands still at their sides, their minds racing with questions they'd never get answers to. As the SUV disappeared into the night, the shorter officer exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Who was she? The radio crackled again. A single voice came through, low, controlled, and unmistakably familiar. "You don't ask questions about people like her." And then silence. The officers stood in the quiet street, the weight of the night settling in. What had started as just another routine stop had turned into something they didn't fully understand, and probably never would. The SUV was gone, the woman was gone, and all that remained was an uneasy feeling that they had brushed up against something far bigger than themselves. The taller officer finally let out a slow breath. "Let's just forget this happened." The shorter one nodded, but deep down, he knew he wouldn't forget. He'd remember the way she looked at them, not with fear, but with certainty. Like she had been in control the entire time. As they walked back to their car, the city carried on like nothing had happened. Just another night, just another shift. But somewhere out there, she was still watching, still working, moving through the shadows, and they would never cross paths again.